All right, thanks for having me. I'm going to talk, obviously, about the livestock market outlook and situation. The biggest things I'm going to focus on this because I have to talk a little bit about everything, some poultry, some pork, and some beef. So I am going to talk about imports and exports, as we've talked quite a bit already, and we'll get more later today. But then just kind of highlighting some of the prices that we've seen, and then what's going to be happening with production. When I'm looking at domestic demand for the first part, if you look at it for 2025, our total meat consumption in the United States was down. We were down about 0.4%. When you break it out into different proteins, though, beef was down about 1.1%, pork about 1.3%, and poultry or broilers was up about 0.9%, while turkey was down. When we look at it for our meat consumption for 2026, it's going to remain pretty stable if we consider all of the proteins, but it varies vastly depending on the different protein that you're looking at. So for beef, we're going to see less consumption in 26. Pork's going to be pretty much stable, and poultry is going to be up. Now, remember, when I'm talking about consumption, one thing I always want to remind people is that this is not as if I'm going out and collecting the data on exactly how much poundage is bought or sold. Consumption, when we look at it from economics, is we say how much is produced, how much is imported, how much is exported, there's an element of waste, and then everything else we just assume is consumed. All right? So it really is kind of a factor of where we're looking import, exports, and basically production. So let's talk about broilers for a minute. In 2025, we saw that we had our production of broilers in the United States was up about 2.1%. Just to give you an idea on these graphs, so everyone's aware, the blue line is the 2025 production, or in this case, it was basically our harvest numbers. And then the dotted blue is the 24, and the red line is the average, the previous 5-year average. All right, we had in 2025 a record large production of broilers that primarily had to do, it was continuation. Mostly a lot of it had to do with continued weight gains that we're seeing in those birds. When we look at turkey, it was down about 5.4% in 25 relative to 24. This was the smallest that we've seen in decades. For it, we will see some increase in 26 in this, but the biggest thing and the biggest issue when we're looking at turkeys has to do with just the poor margins that they've seen and the continued stress of the avian influenza. And I'm putting up here for my clock so I have some idea. All right. When we look at exports then, again, turkey is down, but a lot of that has to do with just a decline in those productions. We should see an improvement, or we should see a volume of it increasing, assuming we have some production increases in 26. And then broilers has remained pretty much stable, and for 26, we'll see some growth on it for exports. When I look at consumption in the United States, then, one of the biggest things is if you look at 25, we're saying it was 118 pounds per capita is what we had available for the U.S. consumer to be able to consume. All right? 103 of that 108 in 2025 was broilers. We've had a 7-pound per capita increase in production over 5 years for broilers. So that's a big number that's banging on the shelves. And then as we continue to increase that, that's going to continue there. All right, let's switch to hogs for a few minutes. We've got the 2025, our production of hog slaughter was down about 1.1%. We'll see a decrease again in 2026. Primarily, that's going to come, though, in the latter part of 2026. We will see an increase in production in the first quarter of 26 and about the first half of the second quarter. All right? I'll talk a little bit more on that. When we look at exports for pork, exports are hugely, well, they're important for all, but this is also a very large percentage. We export about 30% of the pork that we produce in the United States is exported. All right, and so we see that it's been down somewhat. In 2025, it's about 4.8% down, but some of our more important markets, so Japan was up, Mexico was up, whereas like Japan and Canada and South Korea were down. Just because it's down, though, doesn't mean that it's necessarily that the exports aren't strong. They're still very strong. It's just that we have smaller production. So we're still seeing strong demand for U.S. pork there. We're going to see the decline in exports still again in 2026. But again, that has to do overall with the decline in production. All right? So when we look at consumption in the United States, availability of it then for the U.S. consumer is we're going to have about, in 26, we're going to be just shy of 50 pounds per capita available for the consumption in the United States. That's staying less than 50 because of the strength of those exports. All right? So that's where we're looking at it as far as for pork. What do I think? Why do I say that we're going to go down on this? It has a lot to do with the reports that we saw at the end of December. If you look at the breeding herd in the United States right now, this is the smallest that we've had in more than a decade. Even though if you looked at, there's been several years of losses, and Iowa State did a recent study where actually, bizarrely enough, in the last 20 months, they've been positive margins for farrow to finish producers. So the question becomes like, well, why are they not building? But a lot of that has to do with prior to those most recent time frame, they had several years of losses. So you have this concern by producer confidence of how long is this really going to last. Plus you play into this additional things such as age of producers, and then you look at other elements such as domestic policy that's creating it. There's just a lot of producer confidence in the hog market. Even though they've had some recent positive margins, the confidence isn't there in order to build the herd. All right, so that's why I say by the second half of the year, we're going to see pork production down. On the other hand, if we look at the beginning part of it, the actual number of animals that's on feed, it was up slightly at the end of the year, so that's why we'll see increased production in the first part of the year of 26. Let's move to cattle then. So overall for cattle, we have reduced cattle slaughter in 2025. Altogether, when I look at all cattle, it's down about 6.4%. If I break it down into different individuals, steer slaughter, so it was down about 4.2%. Heifer slaughter was down about 7.7%. Total cow slaughter, so that's dairy and beef, is down 11.7%. But if I look at just beef cow slaughter, we're down 17.4%. Why that is? Multiple reasons. One, we have a smaller herd to begin with. So if you have a smaller herd, you're going to have less animals to be able to slaughter. The second thing is, though, that we've slowed our culling rate significantly. The reason why we've slowed our culling rate so much is because, well, I want to take that heifer right now, and if she's even questionable, I'm going to move her so that she's on feed as opposed to keeping her back for heifer retention. So I want to keep my herd maybe the same size or maybe even a little bit smaller, but I'm going to slow that culling rate. That's going to have an impact as we start to grow, and we'll see the cattle numbers. I'll talk about this in a second too. We're going to see the cattle numbers start to increase. They started to, but we're going to still keep that cull rate for cows probably low. That means it's just going to take a while still for this herd to grow. All right? What's it mean from production? We see all the slaughter is down, but on the one hand, that's on one hand. On the other hand, it's both number of animals and weight. Weights were up. So for steers, they were up about 2.6%, and for heifers, they were up about 2.7%. Combining all that together means that our beef production in 2025 was down about 4.4%. We're going to be done again in 26, but I want to talk a little bit because we talked about exports already. And just as this is the one thing for beef, 2022 was a record year for beef export value of exports for the U.S. 2026, when we're looking at our exports and the actual weight of our exports, they're going to be down about 4.2% again in 26. If you look at some things, that some are going, okay, well, that's all basically the difference between 25 and 24, or from 24 to 25 is, China, because we are not exporting to China. Well, we had other markets that kind of took that up. A big chunk of it, yes, we did lose some, but the other part of it is we just don't have as much in order to be able to export. U.S. beef is still out there, and the thing about U.S. beef is it's different than really any other beef in the world. So as we talk about this, imports, right? So 2025, we imported almost 19%, so 18.5% more beef than what we did in 2024. All right, we have a record demand for lean trim in the United States right now. And if I think about this from an overall consumption of beef in the United States, 19% of the beef that's consumed by the consumer in the United States is imported. So why are we, if our exports are down, why are we importing so much more? The reason why is that they are not the same product. We have done an amazing job, as we talked about innovation in agriculture. In the United States, we have done a great job of innovating in the beef market, right? Right now, we are at almost 12% of the product that we produce and harvest is prime. Over 80% of it is choice. So when you think about, this is a really high quality product that consumers in the United States have become to recognize, not just for the quality, but for the consistency. That is because the beef industry has done a great job of innovating with their genetics and the way in which they're feeding. So when we talk about this, there is room for us to be able to continue to innovate. We just have to have some incentivization. All right? So when we're looking at this, the other part about it is we don't want to start having less beef imports, right? Because what we're doing is we're importing product that is of a lesser valued per poundage than what we're exporting. So we're exporting this grain-fed beef that we can get a greater value for and importing that which we're having a lesser value. So overall, in this case, we really want to be the net importer for beef. Now, as consumption, as we talk about this, right, as I say, the biggest things we're talking about is the consumers recognizing the quality. They recognize the taste. They understand the nutrition for it. Consumption is going to be down in 26, so we're going to be down almost 3.1 pounds. But that's not because of the demand, that's because of the production. What we've done in the beef industry, or what the beef industry has done, is they have done a really good job of creating demand that isn't just demand because it's a low-priced product, but they've created that demand because of the consistency and the taste. So that doesn't just go away because prices are high. We've seen record high retail prices on this. The thing is, though, we are getting to a point where how much can you go? And that's where we look at the stabilization period for it. We're at this point when you look at what does beef cost on a retail pound basis relative to how much you have to work for it. We're there, but it doesn't mean that it's going to go down. And we've seen a lot of this. I mean, think about how much you've seen in the news in just the last quarter on what are beef prices. We've had President Trump who says, I'm going to lower the beef prices. I'm going to do all of this, right? But what we have is it's staying stable because people like it. And it's there. Now, what that leads to is that stabilization, because it's in the news so much more, it doesn't mean that it really can go up too much more, but it doesn't mean it's going to have to come down. All right, when I look at a retail price comparison from 2015 to 2025, just as an idea, beef has increased over that time period of the 10 years for 46%, whereas pork's increased 28% and broilers have increased 25%. If I was looking at the average retail price of beef from 2024 to 2025, it's increased 80 cents. That's almost a little over 10% of an increase in 1 year. All right, but we've stayed. Now, this is a graph from USMEF But why I point this out is that I want you to see this is in a 4-year period. Choice retail beef price went up about 29% during this time frame. Then you have all your import exports. You've got your wholesale beef. But the bigger thing to take note of then is look at the live steer price. That's increased 82%. So where we go into this is when we're looking at our cattle inventory. Right? We're going to see cattle inventory in the report next week come down about 0.5%. So we're going to have low culling rates. We're going to have this. Where we get a concern is if we have some weather issues. Right? So all of this means that we're going to continue to have low production, and from the beef side, we're going to have tight supplies. So again, looking at this beef, I'm getting here, so I'm going to go through these a little bit quicker. The beef production is going to be down about 3.4%. This is the graph I want to get to, though, is where I'm looking at when we have an industry such as this, when we have short supply, when I think about it as market power or margins, those that are furthest away from the end consumer typically have the highest margins. We've seen this pendulum switching already to cow-calf producers. If I look at it, this is aggregate, this is not just Wisconsin. In 2024, the average cow-calf producer made $439 per cow profit. In 2025, if I look at my numbers, they made $900. That's the increase because of the shortness of the supply that we have there. Feedlots have changed some, packers are negative. Now, packers have made some changes. They've cut some of their one plant closed. They've cut some hours on others, so this is going to improve it from the short term. But right now, your cow-calf producer is the one who's really holding a lot of this market power because they're the ones who are going to dictate whether or not we're growing and whether or not we're going to have more animals. So where we're at right now, this is just kind of my idea for when we're looking at it for as far as for the overall industry, where our prices are going to go up or down. When I'm looking at it for beef, sorry, I just went through that one really fast. Overall, we're going to see increased beef prices again. So there should be profit. This is where I get to be the sunshine in the room. There is profitability right now in the beef industry. As I've been telling producers, just because there's profitability doesn't mean that you should forgo looking at any risk management issues or not paying attention to your other management issues because you want to make as much as possible, right? So there's profitability options for it in this industry for 2026, and that should continue. The bigger things that we have to think about from the markets is screwworm, Mexican cattle imports. I didn't even get to talk about that. Really, packing capacity, utilization, and recession. So those are all things that are the market's really paying attention to. I'll take questions then when we get to that.